These two men stole an airplane and then flew into the sunset, never to be seen again. The two men's names are John Padilla and Ben Mutantu. And in 2003, these two men would steal a Boeing 727 somehow from the Luanda airport. Ben was an engineer and a pilot, and John was a hired mechanic. It should also be noted that neither of these men were certified to fly a Boeing 727. It is believed that Ben was flying the plane, but they didn't say anything on the runway. Air traffic control was trying to contact them, but they had no luck. The two men didn't let the tower know anything, and they just pulled into the runway and took off into the sky. They headed southwest over the Atlantic Ocean and disappeared completely. The airplane was filled up with 14,000 gallons of fuel, which is more than 1,500 miles of flying. No debris from the plane has ever been found, and the two men have also never been found. None of their clothes were ever found, their body parts were never found, and their identification was never found. This is definitely the greatest mystery in aviation history, because where in the world did the plane go, and where did the two men go? This might actually be a bigger mystery than Malaysia Flight 370, which is regarded as the biggest aviation mystery of all time.
Video that happened in the Dominican Republic. It's like a funeral service, and they have this like flower wreath, and one of the flower wreaths is shaking really violently, and then next to it the other one isn't, so it can't be wind that's like triggering this flower wreath. So what they're saying is that a ghost is shaking it.
Whoa.
And let me know what you guys think.
Nah, I got chills. That's trippy, dude.
First of all, I would leave as soon as I see some shit like that. I'm like, I'm out.
And you guys saw the other flower wreath
All the
was
wreaths,
not
yeah.
moving, bro.
I do want to say this. We always say this when we talk about apparitions, and people think that it's their family member. It's most likely not.
It's hard to say.
It's a hard pill to swallow.
I do not think that's fake at all, bro. Because why the fuck would they pull a fake stunt in the middle of a fucking funeral?
Exactly.
Like who in the
How do you get everybody in on it too? You know?
who in their right mind is gonna do that?
That would be fucked up. They're messing.
Excuse me, what are you doing? No, I just saw you put that underneath her dress.
The man you just saw in that video was 21-year-old Thomas Elliott from North Carolina. And after he was caught on camera trying to secretly film under a girl's dress, he was arrested. Now, Thomas was actually a volunteer at a local elementary school, which meant that before all this happened, he was working very closely with children. Disturbingly, authorities announced they were actually searching his phone for any materials that may be inappropriate related to kids. Now, this is shocking, but it's not surprising. Time and time again in these stories, these predators seek out places like schools to volunteer or work because they get easy access to the most vulnerable part of our population, children. Now, in the video, Thomas actually tries to backtrack and claim this is all one big misunderstanding. But you can clearly see what he was doing in the footage. And I hope that they prosecute this guy to the fullest extent of the law. This is truly deplorable behavior, and I haven't been as shocked as I was when I saw that video in a while. And hopefully this moment that was caught on camera, not the moment that Thomas was expecting to capture on camera, but this one, haunts him until he dies.
What you're about to see is the horrific footage that was taken from the inside of Willowbrook State School, which was an asylum in New York for children with intellectual disabilities. Viewer discretion is advised.
The doctor had warned me that it would be bad. It was horrible.
This is Willowbrook State School. The name makes it sound like it was a lovely place, but really it was described as hell on earth. Willowbrook was a state-supported institution for children with mental disabilities on Staten Island that operated from 1947 to 1987, and it sat on 375 acres. It was originally designed to hold 4,000 children, but it eventually held up to 6,000, making it incredibly overcrowded. No one really knew what was going on at the school until 1972, when an investigative journalist named Geraldo Rivera received a phone call from a doctor at the school. The doctor told Geraldo about the horrific conditions there and wanted the public to know what was truly happening to these kids. So Geraldo visited the school, and what he found was horrifying. Just upon walking into the school, Geraldo said that the smell was so atrocious that he can remember it even today. It was clear that the kids were being severely neglected and abused. They were living in filth and dirt, their clothes were all torn and ragged, and most of them were covered in their own feces. Their rooms were compared to animal cages at the zoo, but worse. Geraldo created an expose that was aired on TV, and it uncovered physical and sexual abuse against the children by members of the school staff. Not only that, but the doctors at Willowbrook were essentially just conducting wildly unethical medical experiments on these children. Outbreaks of hepatitis at the school were really common, which led to years of terrifying experiments and studies on the kids to figure out why 90% of them contracted the virus within 6 months of entering the school. One of the studies was feeding the live hepatitis virus from infected stool samples to 60 healthy children. The doctors would then sit back and watch as their skin and eyes turned yellow and as their livers got bigger. The kids became extremely sick, but the doctors justified their actions by saying that they were probably going to get the virus anyway. They felt that they weren't causing any harm because they were just kids with mental disabilities. Geraldo's expose shed light onto how kids and people in general with disabilities are treated. The film is called Willowbrook: The Last Great Disgrace, and it's one of the most disturbing things that I've ever seen. The school was officially shut down in 1987 after public outrage, and parts of the building were eventually used for the College of Staten Island. What's also crazy is the fact that Andre Rand, who is a suspected serial killer and connected to a series of child kidnappings, previously worked at Willowbrook as an orderly. One of his suspected victims, 12-year-old Jennifer Schwager, was found buried in a shallow grave behind Willowbrook, but at that point, the school had already been abandoned. The expose is an extremely difficult watch, but it did spark a lot of change.
Codex Gigas, aka the Devil's Bible. Keep in mind, this is a book written in the 13th century. The legend goes that there was a monk known as Herman the Recluse. He was part of a monastery in the Czech Republic. For some reason, he was going to get executed. He said to the monks, if you guys spare my life, I promise I'll write a book with all of earthly knowledge and secrets of the world. He told them, okay, we'll spare your life, but with one condition. You have to write the book in one night.
How long was this book?
Bro, I'm pretty sure it was going to be a long ass book. So the reason why they told him to do it in one night is so he wouldn't make it. So he was like, okay, no problem. He was writing for a little bit. Obviously, he quickly realized that
It's impossible.
he resorted to making a deal with the devil. So he told him, in exchange for my soul, help me write this book in one night. The next day, the book was created. It was this huge ass book. It weighed over 100 pounds. You needed 2 people to carry it.
Man, what the f?
And it has a lot of illustrations of the devil and shit. And also, they tested it out and they realized that it would take 20 years of continuous writing for them to recreate the book. Like I said, there's no new teachings in it, but there was a point in time where there was a fire wherever it was being kept and shit. They basically tried to rescue it, and 10 pages ended up going missing. So what they're saying is that maybe those 10 pages were
something new.
Knowledge that we're not supposed to know about.
This child was missing since 2019 and has been found alive underneath the staircase. 4-year-old girl named Paisley Schultes was removed from custody of her biological parents along with her sister. Although it has not been revealed on why her parents Kim Cooper and Cole Schultes were no longer legally allowed to look over their own daughters. In July of 2019, Paisley suddenly vanished from her family home while her older sister was at school. She had been living near Ithaca, New York. Although the police strongly suspected her biological parents, they had no proof at all proving this. The police were actually able to search the parents' property, but they denied having anything to do with their daughter's mysterious disappearance. And the police could not find Paisley inside despite thoroughly looking. However, years later in 2022, the police received a tip that Paisley could still be in the house after all, and was being held in a secret hidden location. At first, it seemed nothing was off about the property at all. But after about an hour, one of the detectives noticed something odd about the stairs. And acting on gut instinct, the officer looked a little closer and eventually found a small hiding place. And when they were able to get closer and get a better look, they found Paisley hiding in the little small space. Paisley's parents were then charged with custodial interference and endangering the welfare of a child.
That clip was recorded during the partial sinking of the Costa Concordia, a cruise ship that partially sunk in 2012 and killed 32 people. At the time that it was built, the Costa Concordia was one of the biggest cruise ships in all of Italy. Now, a common practice is to break a champagne bottle against a ship before its first cruise. But interestingly, in 2005, when they swung that champagne bottle against this ship, it failed to break. This is considered an extremely bad omen, and people had no idea of what was to come. So on January 13th, 2012, the ship set sail from Rome, Italy. And on the western coast of Italy, the ship steered right into a rock, which ripped a 174-foot-long gash in the ship's side. Shortly afterwards, the ship lost all of its power and it began to sink. So shockingly, an order to abandon ship wasn't issued until over an hour after the initial impact. And if they would have issued this earlier, more people probably would have survived. But yeah, unfortunately, 32 people drowned in this incident, and the footage is terrifying. Eventually, the captain of the ship was charged with abandoning his ship and manslaughter, causing a maritime disaster, and lying to authorities, and he was subsequently sentenced to 16 years in prison, basically for his negligence. If you want to hear more true crime stories like this one, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
Imagine waking up to this in your room in the middle of the night. I have to give you a warning for this case. Please don't watch if you're easily disturbed. Now, what makes this case so unnerving is that this man could literally be your relative, your husband, your neighbour. It was 1957 on the Channel Island of Jersey. A young woman waited innocently at a bus stop. Suddenly she was startled by a man coming up behind her and wrapping a rope round her neck. He dragged her to a field and brutally arred her before fleeing. She was traumatized, but thankfully still alive. Soon there were multiple victims reporting similar crimes. The women reported that the mystery attacker smelt really musty. Then in 1960, the attacks would become even more horrifying. On the 14th of February, a 12-year-old boy woke in the night and was startled. A terrifying man was stood at the foot of his bed in a horrifying rubber mask. He was also wearing nail-studded wristlets. Like in his initial attacks, the intruder tied a rope around the victim's neck. He dragged the boy into a field and arred him. Shortly after, he broke into the cottage of a woman and her daughter in the middle of the night. It was 1:30 a.m. and the woman was absolutely terrified by the noise of someone entering her home. She grabbed the phone to ring for help, but the intruder had cut the telephone lines. The woman managed to escape and call for help, but by the time she'd got back, the attacker had arred her teenage daughter. The mystery attacker left a trail of terror everywhere he went. He was systematically targeting houses with children inside. He'd break in and arr them wearing the hideous rubber mask. One of his victims was a boy of just 8 years old. Residents in the local area were understandably terrified. They all feared being the next victim of the man that they were calling the Beast of Jersey. Now, police initially blamed a local fisherman for these attacks off literally no evidence, and it was so compelling that the locals got wind of this and burned his house down. The innocent man left the area, but they knew it wasn't him because the attacks continued. The real culprit was a man named Edward Paisnell. He was a seemingly normal man with a wife. Horrifically, he was actually volunteering at the time, looking after vulnerable children. There were rumours that he was abusing both the children in his care and the staff. Meanwhile, investigators were taking ages to figure out who the Beast was. In 1966, a letter arrived at the police station from the Beast, and it stated, "My dear sir, I think that it is just the time to tell you that you are just wasting your time, as every time I have done what I always intended to do, and remember it will not stop at this, but I will be fair to you and give you a chance. I have never had much out of this life, but I intend to get everything I can now. I have always wanted to do the perfect crime. I have done this, but this time let the moon shine very bright in September, because this time it must be perfect, not one but two. I am not a maniac by a long shot, but I like to play with you people. You will hear from me before September, and I will give you all the clues, just to see if you can catch me. Yours very sincerely, Wait and See." He continued to break into homes and attack people. It wasn't until 1971 when Edward got pulled over for going across the traffic lights on a red light that things would all start to unfold. Police found the terrifying mask inside his car and also the coat with nails around the wrists. He was arrested and ultimately found guilty of the string of horrific crimes. He was given 30 years in prison. He was actually let out in 1991 on good behaviour, but had a heart attack and died shortly after.
This is the site of the 2011 Zanesville, Ohio animal massacre, and if there's ever a story that needs a trigger warning, it's this one. This is Terry Thompson. He was a Vietnam War veteran and an exotic animal collector. He owned a 73-acre farm near Zanesville, Ohio, and turned it into a private zoo called the Muskingum County Animal Farm, where he kept many exotic animals throughout the property. On October 18th, 2011, shortly before 5 p.m., Terry set 50 of his animals loose into the town of Zanesville and then fatally shot himself in the head. His body would then be partially eaten by his own animals. As sunset was approaching, multiple 911 calls started pouring in about dangerous wild animals roaming around the countryside, and what followed would turn out to be a deadly massacre.
911. Is this a hoax or is there truly?
No, it's true. And if you see anything, stay indoors.
Remain indoors. Don't try to approach them.
They're on the interstate. 2 more African lions. One is wounded roaming the property.
It's complete chaos out there. We've got officers going in heavily armed, and now it's all snowballed into hell.
While the animals were on the loose, people were urged to stay indoors, and all of the schools in the area were canceled. Police were then faced with the unthinkable, and they ended up fatally shooting 48 animals before they could terrorize the town. Luckily, no humans were attacked, but the scene was something straight out of a nightmare. Police killed 18 Bengal tigers, 17 lions, 6 black bears, 3 cougars, 2 grizzly bears, 2 wolves, and a baboon that were roaming the town. According to one police officer, he said the scene was so gruesome and the smell alone made him unable to sleep for 2 weeks. A responding officer also said that the animals were exhibiting aggressive behavior, and at times it was almost a hand-to-hand combat with them. The bodies of the deceased animals were all lined up the next morning and were then put into a bucket loader to be buried on Terry's farm. What's crazy is that you can still view the photos of the crime scene online, although I don't recommend it. They are incredibly graphic. While the animals were being loaded up, a handful of people came along and tried to steal a lion's dead body, but thankfully they were caught and arrested for that. Authorities also discovered 6 animals that were alive in cages in Terry's home. They found 3 leopards, a small grizzly bear, and 2 monkeys. Those animals were tranquilized and taken to the Columbus Zoo. 1 monkey was never found, and it was assumed to have been eaten by another animal, but according to experts on the scene, it was highly likely to have carried the herpes B virus. So the fact that it was never found is a little scary. Many people think that this situation could have been prevented. Terry was reported multiple times before his death for unsafe housing for the animals, and he also didn't provide them with sufficient food and water. His animals would often escape his poorly fenced yard and cause damage to the neighbor's property. Along with that, he was also cited in the past for animal abuse and neglect, but in 2011, at least in Ohio, it wasn't illegal to own exotic animals. But following this massacre, Ohio's exotic animal laws took full effect in 2014. As for why Terry might have done this, leading up to the incident, he was in extreme debt. He had just separated from his wife, and he was also facing house arrest after a year in prison for a gun conviction. So it seems like he might have just snapped. There's a whole documentary about this called Horror at the Zoo, and it's an insane watch.
This girl was killed and had all of her teeth removed by a cartel member while on vacation in Mexico. The body of 23-year-old Lisbeth Flores was found dead in the Mexican town of Matamoros. The sad thing is, Lisbeth was a mother of 2 and was also visiting Mexico for vacation. On August 9th, 2023, Lisbeth told her mother that she would be crossing the border into Matamoros to visit her boyfriend. Lisbeth assured her mother that she would return later that evening. This wasn't her first time crossing the border, but for some reason, her decision to do it did not sit right with her mother at all. Maybe it was her instincts telling her something bad was going to happen. But regardless, she let Lisbeth go. However, when Lisbeth failed to return home that night, her mother knew something was wrong. She filed a missing persons report immediately the next morning. But tragically, the day after filing, Mexican officials discovered Lisbeth's lifeless body abandoned on a field in Matamoros. And the condition of her remains were absolutely horrific. She had been brutally assaulted and all of her teeth were removed from her mouth before she died. And the fatal injury seemed to be from a powerful blow to the head using this large rock that was discovered at the scene. Some say it was robbery, others say it was sexual assault, but no one really knows what happened exactly between Lisbeth and her killer. The good thing is the killer was arrested. Braulio Martinez was caught at his residence in connection with the murder, and after pleading no contest, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison, which many people thought wasn't a long enough sentence. This is just so sad, and due to the violence in this area, Lisbeth's mother is now without a child, and her own 2 kids are left without a mother. But luckily, local businesses stepped up by contributing funds to her children's education. As this kind gesture definitely helped, nothing will bring back their mother, Lisbeth Flores. May she rest in peace.
Rosa de Guadalupe.
Yes.
This specific episode is a very disturbing episode, and I remember watching this episode.
What's it called?
Sales de baño, lo más oscuro. This kid, he's frantically moving, kind of looks like he's on some possessed shit. He's just moving like and you see a bunch of doctors trying to restrain him, but they keep saying, yo, this kid is like abnormally strong. They were telling the mom, there's something wrong with your kid, bro. This isn't normal. Did he take anything? And the mom is saying, no, he's a saint.
The mom's in denial.
The sister, she ends up finding something in his room. Little baggie with some white powder in it. And she's like, esto es cocaína.
Devil's dandruff.
And he's slowly becoming an addict.
How old is this kid? How old does he
in high
look?
school.
Then they find out that the shit that he's taking is cheaper than actual. He starts getting crazy. He starts burning up, and he has to take off his clothes. Him and his girlfriend go to a party, and they take regular, and he goes back home, and he's kind of like, what the fuck is this whack? I want the other stuff. Fast forward to another party. He wasn't taking the regular like everybody else. He was taking his own shit. And then this is where like shit just hit the fucking fan, bro. He starts taking his clothes off. The girlfriend's like, ooh, let me like get him a little more hot. Let me dance on him. But him, since he's tripping, he starts seeing her like evil.
Like she's a demon or something?
Like some trippy ass shit, bro. And then it just goes to him lunging at her, and he starts eating her face.
Is this a Guadalupe episode?
Yes.
And I don't understand why he's the one who got the fucking win, the happy ending at the end.
You know what? They came to the conclusion what he was actually fucking doing, right? Bath salts.
Wasn't that an incident?
This girl was brutally murdered by a group of teenagers for being a goth. Sophie Lancaster was a bright girl from Lancashire. She was taking a gap year and was soon to begin an English degree. However, her plans would come crashing down when her life was stolen from her before she turned 21. She was dating 21-year-old Robert Maltby. He was an art student from Manchester. The couple had been together for 3 years and were really happy together. They were self-proclaimed goths. On the 11th of August 2007, a horrific attack occurred. The pair were heading home on the day in question just after 1 a.m. They were jumped by a huge group of teenagers. This took place near a skate park in Backup. The pair were both knocked unconscious in the vicious attack. An eyewitness reported seeing them both get kicked in the head. They were attacked so brutally that when police arrived on the scene, they couldn't actually tell which victim was female and which was male. A group of teenagers were heard bragging about what they'd done. One was heard telling another person that the pair were a right mess. They also bragged that they'd done something good. Now the pair were rushed to hospital and Robert was left in a coma with memory loss and also internal bleeding. Sophie was also in a coma and was put on a life support machine. Robert did gradually make a recovery, but tragically Sophie's life support machine was turned off on the 24th of August. Police began the painstaking task of trying to identify the callous attackers. They were told by eyewitnesses that there were about 5 or 6 people in the group. Investigators ended up charging 5 teenage boys with the murder. At the gang's trial, all 5 males pleaded not guilty to murder and grievous bodily harm with intent for the attack on Robert. The court were told that the motive for the crimes was literally the fact that the couple dressed differently. Ultimately, Brendan Harris was found guilty of murder. Ryan Herbert pleaded guilty to murder. They were both given life to serve at least 16 to 18 years. Joseph and Danny Hume, who are brothers, and Daniel Mallet were sent to prison for grievous bodily harm with intent. The judge stated, at least wild animals when they hunt in packs have a legitimate reason for doing so, to obtain food. You have none, and your behaviour on that night degrades humanity itself.
Actor Sacha Baron Cohen may have uncovered a pedophile ring while filming one of his TV shows. So in the series Who is America, Sacha Baron Cohen traveled around America. And in the show he did a lot of crazy things, like getting Dick Cheney to sign a waterboarding kit, and having Roy Moore take a pedophile lie detector test. But the stuff that they filmed in Las Vegas was so dark that they ended up sending it to the FBI. In this specific scene, Sasha, who was playing a character, was interviewing a concierge in Las Vegas. In the interview, Sasha told the concierge that he had molested an 8-year-old boy. Now this is weird, but he justified this as saying this is extreme comedy and we wanted to see what he would say. Now I'm going to read you a quote from Sasha. He said, "Instead, this concierge stays in the room and I go, listen, you got to help me get rid of the problem." And this guy starts advising Gio how to get rid of this issue. We even at one point talk about murdering the boy, and the concierge is just saying, well, listen, I'm really sorry. In this country, we can't just drown the boy. This is America, we don't do that. And then in the end, he puts me in touch with a lawyer who can silence the boy. It became really dark stuff. So, as if this interview couldn't get any darker, somehow this footage does. Sasha then asked the concierge if he could help him find a date for the night. Sasha told the concierge he wanted a young boy, quote, lower than bar mitzvah, but older than 8. And this concierge allegedly told him, yeah, I can put you in touch with somebody who can get you some boys like that. Now, this gets a little interesting as well. This is a quote from Sasha. He said, "We immediately turned over the footage to the FBI because we thought perhaps there's this pedophile ring in Las Vegas that's operating for these very wealthy men." And this concierge said that he'd worked for politicians and various billionaires. But in the end, the FBI decided not to pursue it. That's really concerning to me. Why would the FBI not look into something like this? I mean, they have hidden camera footage of somebody admitting that they can procure young boys for money. And yet, yeah, the FBI never officially looked into it. Sasha and his team turned this footage over, and the rest is history. Nothing ever came of this. Now, obviously, there have been some allegations made against Sasha by Rebel Wilson recently. I covered those on TikTok, but what do you guys make of this story? Do you think that there's a pedophile ring operating in Las Vegas? If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. The podcast is available on all streaming platforms.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
There's a really strange missing persons case happening right now that everyone should be talking about. This is Dia Abrams. She mysteriously disappeared from her 117-acre California ranch in 2020, and the details surrounding her disappearance are odd. Dia was last seen on June 6, 2020 at around 2:30 p.m. by her boyfriend Keith Harper. The two had been living together since 2016. According to Keith, the two had lunch together at her Bonavista Vista ranch house in Mountain Center, where she told him that she needed to talk to him about something. But the two were reportedly supposed to go on a trip to Colorado the next day, and the property needed worked on, so he pushed the conversation off. He then spent the next several hours mowing the meadow, and during that time, Keith said he received an ominous text from Dia saying, quote, "You cannot save me from all things," end quote. Keith said he then returned to the ranch house at around 7:30 p.m. and Dia was gone. All of her personal belongings, including her Ford F-350, her phone, her purse, and her dog Ruby, were all left behind. Keith said the entire time he was outside on the ranch, he had a clear view of the front gate, and he didn't see anyone enter or leave. He then said that he spent the rest of the night searching for Dia, but when he couldn't find her, he reported her missing the next day to Riverside Police. The very next day, about 26 of Dia's neighbors, friends, and family came out and spent the entire day searching for her on the Bonavista property, but there was no trace of Dia. Her friends recall Keith sobbing that day, saying, quote, "I'll never see her again." It would take the police a few days to come out and search the property, but suspiciously, Keith would leave before they could arrive. According to him, he spent the next week attending business meetings in Arizona and New Mexico, traveling in his RV. He apparently owns property in Arizona and a storage unit business in New Mexico. And like I said, this was all before police could search Dia's property or his RV. Keith claimed to be in contact with the police the entire time, but they actually had to track him down at his storage unit. They were able to search both the RV and the unit and ended up removing a section of the front driver's seat as evidence, as well as a list of evidence from his storage unit that hasn't been made public. Now, Dia's son reportedly learned of his mom's disappearance from her neighbors, not from Keith, the day she was reported missing. And when he went to the Bonavista ranch to search for his mom, he said that her bedroom door looked like it was smashed in from the outside. He also discovered a handwritten note from Dia saying that she was scared for her life. When police officially did come out and search the property, they also found 2 shell casings on the front porch and drops of blood on a sheet in Dia's bedroom. But Keith has explanations for both of those findings. He says that the blood on the sheet is likely from a rare skin condition that he has that makes him bleed easily, and the shell casings on the front porch were probably from him shooting at a coyote. Dia was seen on her neighbor's Ring doorbell video about 5 hours before she disappeared. It was around 9 in the morning, and she was bringing her neighbor a batch of freshly made cinnamon rolls. Her neighbor reportedly had cancer and was going through chemo, and they had mentioned that they really wanted cinnamon rolls, so Dia made them for her. After this, she vanished. Multiple searches have taken place, including the Bonavista Ranch and one of her other properties called the Sky High Ranch. At the moment, it's not clear if the third property that she owns has been searched, but it's now been 4 years, and Dia is still missing. The timeline of her disappearance is based entirely on Keith's statements since he was the only one present at the time she went missing, and police have named him a person of interest as a result, although he denies any involvement. During the investigation, police learned that just 2 weeks before Dia went missing, she made changes to her trust, naming Keith as a co-trustee of her estate, which also included her 2 other properties. And up until January of this year, Keith continued living on her ranch and even turned it into a short-term rental property, which was really suspicious to Dia's friends and family. You'd think that with her being actively missing, you wouldn't just let random people on the property. But in late 2023, a judge removed Keith as the co-trustee after he tried to list the ranch for sale. He reportedly contacted a listing agent and said that he owned the ranch for 16 years and wanted it listed for $5.2 million. And after learning that he improperly removed some of Dia's personal belongings from the property, a judge ordered him to vacate the ranch, which he did in January of this year. He's not allowed to return either. A new court-appointed co-trustee now has access to Dia's estate and has since listed 2 of her properties for sale, including the one that has possibly not yet been searched. The Bonavista Ranch hasn't yet been listed, but it is expected to be soon. According to authorities, if Dia isn't found by June of 2025, half of her estate will go to her children, while the other half will still go to Keith. Those closest to Dia feels that Keith has more to do with her disappearance than he's letting on, and that's because of his past criminal history. He was previously convicted of 2 counts of unlawful sexual contact, and in 2002, he pleaded guilty to third-degree assault against his ex-wife. With the bizarre circumstances surrounding Dia's disappearance, her family thinks that she was definitely met with foul play. Her son believes that she was kidnapped, murdered at another location, and then had her body disposed of somewhere. According to them, Dia would never leave her ranch or her animals behind. She even refused to leave her property a few years back when there was a massive fire surrounding 3 sides of her land. It's now been 4 years, and whatever happened to Dia remains a mystery. If you have any information regarding her disappearance, please contact the number on the screen.
This man had a magazine photo shoot at the crime scene of his wife's murder. This is the horrifying case of the murder of Sharon Tate by cult leader Charles Manson. Sharon Tate was a star from a young age. At just 16 years old, she was crowned Miss Richland, Washington. She was fiercely ambitious and always wanted to be on screen. At the start of the 60s, she starred on the front cover of a newspaper, and roles in films followed shortly after. She moved to California to begin what would be an impressive Hollywood career. When she was just 20 years old, people were dubbing her the next Marilyn Monroe. However, things would come to a tragic end for the talented icon. Sharon started dating French actor Philippe Fourquet, and they eventually got engaged. The relationship was a troubled one, though, and Philippe eventually hospitalized Sharon. The violence would be a horrific foreshadowing of things to come. After her engagement broke down, she started dating Roman Polanski. The pair got married, and then Sharon fell pregnant in 1968. Horrifically, she would be murdered before she was able to give birth. Now, the couple lived in a stunning rented property in the Santa Monica Mountains. William, the caretaker, lived in the guest house. Now, a record producer named Terry Melcher had actually previously rented the property. He had been introduced to Charles Manson. Charles was a musician, but he was also well known for being a cult leader. He'd been in and out of prison and had built up an army of followers that he called the Manson family. Now, Charles had a lot of power over these people. Terry really wasn't keen on Charles and his music, which angered Charles. It's reported that Charles began to get obsessed with the Beatles song Helter Skelter. He felt it was relating to starting a race war. In March 1969, Charles went to that property looking for Terry. It was reported that he was sent away in an unfriendly manner. Some theorized that what happened next was due to Charles's resentment about this. On the 25th of July 1969, 3 members of the Manson family held a man hostage. This was Gary Hinman, a music teacher. Now, it was believed that the reason for this is because they felt that Gary had a lot of assets and they were trying to get him to hand over them to the cult. He denied having any money, so Charles turned up and slashed him with a sword. A cult member named Bobby then stabbed him to death. The group wrote the words "political piggy" on the wall in the victim's blood. Bobby was arrested shortly after. Days later, on the evening of the 8th of August, 4 members of the Manson family broke into Sharon's home. Now, her husband was actually away at the time. The heinous acts that would follow would stun America. Sharon's friend Jay Sebrig was at the house, along with her husband's friend Wojtek Frykowski and his girlfriend Abigail Folger. Caretaker William was also at the property with his friend 18-year-old Stephen. Following Charles's orders, the gang murdered Sharon. She was only 26 at the time and obviously 8.5 months pregnant. She reportedly pleaded with them before they murdered her. She was stabbed and then hanged. They wrote "pig" on the door in her blood. The gang had apparently been ordered by Charles to totally destroy everyone at the house, and he told them to do it as gruesome as you can. The group also murdered Abigail, Wojtek, Jay, and Stephen. Prior to being killed, one of the victims apparently asked Charles what he was doing, to which he replied, "I'm the devil and I'm here to do the devil's business." Bizarrely, Sharon's husband got the call that his wife had been murdered and he agreed to do a photo shoot at the crime scene. Her blood was on the front door and many people were baffled by this decision. The day after the brutal killing of Sharon and her friends, another shocking murder. This time the group tied up and murdered Lino and Rosemary LaBianca at their home. It's believed that they were selected at random and the killers wrote "death to pigs" in the victim's blood on the walls. On the 26th of August, the group murdered 35-year-old stuntman Donald Shea. They stabbed him and tortured him to death. Charles and his followers were ultimately convicted of 9 counts of murder. However, it's believed that there could be at least 12 more victims we don't know about. Charles died in prison aged 83.
This is what would happen if you ate dry ice, and it wouldn't be good at all. Okay, so you very well could have eaten dry ice before, in a cocktail or ice cream, but that's in extremely small doses. The real thing is negative 109 degrees Fahrenheit, which means as soon as you eat it, you will feel a cooling sensation all around your mouth. Your tongue and mouth will be frozen in a matter of seconds, which wouldn't be fun. And your teeth will feel extremely awful. Just imagine biting into the coldest ice cream bar imaginable. And if you kept it in there longer, you will eventually get frostbite. But if you swallow the dry ice, that's where the real problems begin. It will then land in your stomach, and if you eat enough of it, you will have a very, very sharp pain. And the craziest thing is, you will actually get frostbite on your stomach lining. And the more and more you eat, it will start to turn into gas, which would result in you burping up freezing gas. And eventually, after some time, your stomach will explode. So whatever you do, never eat dry ice unless you want your mouth looking like this and your stomach exploding.
So this week it came out that Kristen Chenoweth was almost a victim of the Girl Scout murders. This is going to be part of a new series called Close Encounters about people who narrowly escaped a horrible fate, so follow along for more. Some quick backstory is in 1977, 3 girls were found murdered on their first night at Girl Scout camp in Oklahoma. They were all staying in a tent together and their bodies were found on the trail leading to the camp showers. Now, in 1977, there was no way to test for DNA evidence, but a local man, Gene Leroy Hart, had actually escaped prison and was on the run. He was arrested for the murders, but was acquitted by a jury. There was actually a note found on the campgrounds 2 months earlier that said, "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls in Tent 1, but that note was discarded by the camp director, thinking it was a prank. Now, Broadway actress Kristen Chenoweth was actually supposed to be on that trip. She fell ill that weekend and was unable to go, but she says that it's haunted her entire life. So it wasn't until this year, 45 years after the murders took place, that we might finally have enough DNA evidence to convict Gene Leroy Hart. He passed away in 1979, but this might at least give some closure to the families. Hulu just released a documentary called Keeper of the Ashes about this entire event. Let me know if you're going to watch this weekend.
Conducted inhumane medical experiments without limits in the concentration camps of Auschwitz. I am Josef Mengele, a German doctor and SS officer in 1943. I was supposed to be responsible for selecting detainees upon their arrival. I was so cruel that no selection took place. I sent them all to the gas chamber. During this time, I carried out increasingly bizarre experiments, particularly on twins due to my obsession with human genetics. I subjected prisoners to organ extractions, injections of toxic substances, unnecessary surgeries, and other medical tortures, all without anesthesia, only for my personal medical experimentation. I even attempted to alter the genetics of patients to fit the criteria of my SS officer ideologies. I also performed numerous involuntary sterilizations, using methods that caused suffering to prisoners due to the infections they provoked. The human experiments I conducted at Auschwitz represent one of the darkest chapters in the history of medicine. Despite this, I was never convicted for these acts because I fled to South America for many years. I died of a heart attack in 1979 in Brazil, never having been judged for my crimes.
This is what would happen if you were the only person on Earth. Up first, if you're the only person on Earth, you can do and go anywhere you virtually want. Which would be awesome, but you should be way more concerned about your survival. You have to be extremely careful where you want to seek shelter, because cities would be extremely dangerous. And without proper maintenance, they will start to fall apart pretty quickly, and you can even run into dangerous insects and animals. Next, if you wanted to go to the country, even that isn't safe. 400 nuclear power plants will begin to fail and explode, causing hundreds of nuclear explosions, which wouldn't be good at all. Now, when it comes to food, supermarkets are the place to go. They have enough canned foods there to last you decades. But if eating natural is more your style, you might have to hunt like they did back in the old days. Finally, for water, you will have thousands of liters to go through. This is from all the bottles of water at different stores and places. But eventually, you will have to learn how to purify your own water, which really isn't hard at all. So all in all, if you play your cards right, you can easily survive being the only person on Earth.
TikToker faked having cancer in order to trick people out of money via a fundraising page. A TikToker from Iowa called Madison Russo was arrested in January this year after faking having pancreatic cancer. She did this in October 2022 when she was a university student. She claimed on social media that she had been diagnosed with the life-threatening condition. Initially, people believed her, but then medical professionals came forward to cast doubt over her claims. They stated that there were medical discrepancies in her story. Police then actually got involved and looked at her medical records, which confirmed that she had never been diagnosed with cancer. She was charged with theft by means of deception for using the fake illness to raise nearly $38,000 from kind donors online. She had set up a GoFundMe in order to obtain money and has now been ordered to pay restitution. She was recently given a 10-year suspended sentence, and the judge ordered her to pay the restitution and over $1,000 fine. She will also have to complete 100 hours of community service. The judge stated that she had taken part in a criminal scheme and that serious crimes must have serious consequences. The judge stated that she had deceived friends, family, her community, other cancer victims, charities, and strangers.
These are scary videos you should never watch at night. Okay, so the video I'm about to show you shows a kid who was home alone one night when something or somebody started knocking on his door saying it was his mother. But the thing is, his mom wasn't even home because she was working the night shift. And the way it's knocking and sounding make it sound so demonic. Let me know what you think this is because it's absolutely disturbing.
Gabe? Gabe, it's your mom. You should come out. You've been in there for so long. Gabe, come out. Gabe, it's your mother. You should come out.
Then what's your name then?
I simulated my own abduction to obtain $30,000 from the Kidnapped Victims Fund. My name is Sherry Papini. I am a mother of 2 children, and on November 2nd, 2016, I was reported missing by my husband, Keith Papini. I had gone for a morning jog and did not return. Authorities quickly initiated a search to find me. About 3 weeks later, on November 24th, 2016, I was found near a highway in Woodland, California, approximately 240 kilometers from where I had disappeared. I was injured and bound with chains. The precise details of what happened during my disappearance remained unclear and gave rise to much speculation. I told investigators that I had been abducted by 2 masked Hispanic women who allegedly beat and mistreated me during my captivity. I claimed to have been released by my captors and left on the side of the road. Authorities conducted a thorough investigation into the case, but obviously found nothing. I received over $30,000 from the Kidnapped Victims Fund and, according to some sources, possibly an additional $127,567 from Social Security. Subsequently, authorities uncovered the deception, leading to my conviction and imprisonment in a federal institution in 2022.
Have you heard of the singer who narrowly escaped Ted Bundy? This is part of a series called Close Encounters, people who just barely escaped a terrible fate, so follow along for more. So Debbie Harry is the iconic singer from the band Blondie, and one night in 1970, before she was even famous, she was out late at night walking by herself in Manhattan. And that's when she was approached by an attractive man in a white Volkswagen Beetle. Sound familiar? She said she got a bad feeling from the man and said no, but he was pretty persistent. And she had been walking a while and her feet were hurting and she was tired, so eventually she kind of just gave in and got in the car. She quickly realized that something was not right with this car. The backseat had no window cranks and no handles, like there was no way for her to get out of the car. She starts panicking, but she has the wherewithal to reach her arm out of the open window and open the car door from the outside. But the man driving sees her do this, so he speeds up and takes a really sharp corner, throwing her out of the car onto the street. Years later, during the Ted Bundy trial, Debbie Harry was watching TV and immediately recognized him. Some people are skeptical and say that Ted Bundy might have been in Florida when Debbie reported seeing him, but all of these years, Debbie has remained steadfast in the fact that it was definitely him that picked her up, and all of the details she has noted about the car have been spot on. Bundy went on to confess to the murder of 30 women, but a lot of people think that number is a lot higher. So thank God she got out of that car.
This is the unsolved murder of Anton Jermaine Hyman. Anton was described by his mother Vanessa as a happy boy, well liked by the girls and a proper Jack the Lad. He liked basketball, music, his moped, and was also into plaiting and cutting hair. He was also a doting big brother to his little sister. On March 20th, 2004, Anton said bye to his mum and left the house. He was seen by witnesses buying a Mother's Day card and then getting into a taxi outside KFC by himself. Anton's body was discovered by a passerby around 11 a.m. on March 21st, 2004. He was lying face down in the River Brent. He'd been stabbed, shot and beaten. Forensic examinations showed that he'd been shot with a homemade .22 caliber bullet and stabbed with a 4.5-inch knife. A call to Anton's phone had also been answered after the time that police believe he died, but they've been unable to trace whoever answered that call. Anton's family over the years have put out multiple appeals for information and even offered £20,000 as a reward for any information that leads to the killer being found. Anton's mother believes there's a fear factor around his death and anyone coming forward. She said that his death was brutal and nobody would want to hold their hands up to doing that or to even knowing about it. Police believe he was killed the evening of the 20th of March 2004. He was captured on CCTV around 8 p.m. between Greenford Avenue and Brent Valley Park in Hanwell. It's now 9 years on from this murder and somebody out there must know something. There's been multiple arrests since Anton's death, but everyone's been released without charge, and the police are no closer to finding out what happened to Anton.
These are scary games to play in real life, part 2. This game is called Concentrate, and it's an extremely disturbing game that tells the players how they're going to die. To start the game, the person playing sits down on the ground with their eyes closed, and someone then sits behind them. Then the person behind will start lightly tapping on the player's back while saying, "Concentrate, concentrate, people are dying, children are crying, concentrate, concentrate." Now tap on their head and say you just got hit with a hammer. Then poke both sides of their body and say you just got stabbed. Now grab their neck and swing them back and forth and say you just got hung. Finally, whisper in their ear saying you're standing on the edge of a building. You're feeling dizzy and suddenly somebody pushes you. Now tell the person to open their eyes and ask them what color did they see when their eyes were closed. And whatever color they saw will reveal how they will die. Red means you're going to get stabbed, blue means you are going to drown, yellow means you would die by poison, orange means you would die by fire, green means you would die from a great height, purple is suffocation, brown is buried alive, gray is dying from a disease in the hospital, white means you would die from old age and go to heaven, and black means you would die of old age and go to hell.
One of Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire's first agents was a pedophile. This is an extremely disturbing story. So I can't find any real photos online of this guy. I don't know if he's wiped it off the face of the internet, but his name was Robert David Villard, or Bob Villard. He was an acting coach for young and aspiring actors, and he represented a number of the clients that he coached as well. So in 2004, a 17-year-old boy reported to the police that Bob had molested him when he was only 13. Bob pled no contest to the charges, validated the kid's story, and basically tried to put the whole thing behind him, but the internet would never let this story die. That is because he was one of Leonardo DiCaprio's first talent agents, and he took a number of pictures of him, including this picture right here, and even this picture. Now apparently he represented him for a good while because these are all photos that Bob took of Leo DiCaprio. And since Bob was an agent that represented a bunch of different children, only God knows how many kids he managed to victimize, or how many kids he victimized that stayed silent. So I'm looking at newspapers.com right now. Now this is interesting. This is something that I never found. I should say this is something that I never found talked about in any of these articles, but I think this is the same guy, Robert David Villard. He's right here in a newspaper in 1987. So this was over 15 years before he was charged with actually touching a child. He was caught in a CP sting. I'm finding this out right now for the first time on newspapers.com. Check this out. This is an actual old article. So this is a whole old article from 1987. Look who else is here. Robert David Villard, 40, an agent for child actors. That has to be the same guy. So he was charged with receiving or interstate transportation of CP. That is crazy. So yeah, I guess that just proves once a pedophile, always a pedophile.
This man very nearly got away with murder until he decided to strike again. It was the 15th of July 2010, and Norma Lopez was just a normal 17-year-old girl. She was a hard-working girl who loved dancing and fashion. She was attending summer school at Valley View High in California. On the day in question, she left her final class of the day and went to meet friends. She usually walked from school with her boyfriend, but on this occasion she was alone. She was on her way to her friend's house near the school. When she never turned up though, her friends were concerned. They decided to see if they could meet her on the way, and they walked her route across the field towards the school. It was there that they made a worrying discovery. Norma's bag, a school binder, and a broken earring were lying on the floor. Norma, though, was nowhere to be seen. They called police and a search began, but no luck. 5 days later, it was announced that there was a $35,000 reward for information leading to Norma's return. Tragically, this didn't help, and just a few hours later, Norma's body was discovered. She was found deceased just over 2 miles away from where she had vanished. She was found with no clothes on from the waist up, and her death was determined a homicide, but her cause of death was not determined. The hunt was on to find her killer, but it would actually take a year before a breakthrough. In the meantime, police tested DNA that they found on Norma's earring, and it had no matches. That was until September 2011 when a match came through following a man being arrested on an unrelated charge. This was 42-year-old Jesse Perez Torres. They also found that his DNA was all over Norma's clothes too. He was arrested for the kidnap and murder of Norma. At his trial, it was revealed that he had randomly encountered the girl on her solo walk. He had been reportedly angry about his wife leaving him during that time. An anonymous woman also testified that he had attacked her too, dragging her into his car at knife point and R-ing her. He was found guilty and was given the death penalty.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there. Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. At least that's what a lot of people think. Today we're going to take a look at some of the evidence that may refute the official story. And you can decide for yourself what you think about this whole thing, but let me tell you, some of this stuff is pretty crazy. If you want me to do a whole series about Jeffrey Epstein, his life and his crimes, let me know in the comments section below, but today we're talking about his death. On July 6, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested when he was leaving his private jet. And a little bit over a month later, he was found dead in his jail cell. When Epstein was arrested, this was absolutely national news. Everybody was talking about it. It was such a crazy story because he had so many powerful connections. He had been really good friends with the President of the United States at the time, tech moguls, and loads of other celebrities and politicians from across the planet. So everybody in prison knew that this guy needed to be guarded, right? I mean, he was literally the most high-profile prisoner in America. So this is where the story starts to get a little strange. So according to various prison psychologists that had talked to Jeffrey Epstein while he was in prison, he said that he didn't want to take his own life. Many times he expressed to these people that he didn't like pain, he was a coward, it was against his religion, and that he would literally never do that to himself. And I know that it is possible that he was manipulating people into thinking that he wouldn't do it just so that he could do it, but it is interesting that he was talking about this all the time. So the mistakes surrounding Epstein's arrest and eventual death started right away. On a prison intake form, he was listed as a black inmate, obviously he was white, and it also stated that he had no prior sex offense convictions, even though he was a registered sex offender. Like I said, this is the most high-profile inmate in America, so why would they make these mistakes? There were also multiple phone calls placed by Jeffrey Epstein that were not logged and not recorded by the prison system. They have no real record of who he called or who he talked to, and that is obviously a blatant violation of any prison's policy. For the entire month that he was held in prison, all the psychologists agreed that he may have seemed a little down, but he didn't seem like he was about to take his own life. On the night that Epstein took his own life, he made a social phone call. This phone call was not recorded, it was not logged, like I said, as prison policy states that it should be. And later on, the unit manager asked who Epstein had called, and he said his own mother, which didn't make sense because Epstein's mom died in 2004. In reality, that phone call was placed to his girlfriend at the time, Karina, who was a dentist from New York. There are 3 people that have knowledge of this phone call. None of them have stated that Epstein gave any indication that he was about to take his life. And it's interesting because the New York Times asked the Bureau of Prisons for Epstein's phone logs from prison, and they released them, but that phone call was not on the logs. After this, Epstein was escorted back into his cell at 7:49 p.m. by a guard named Tova Noel. And it was at this point in the night when the story takes a turn, and all of the controversy really begins. I'm going to cover all the stuff that surrounds his actual death in the next part of this TikTok series, so follow me if you want to hear the stuff from his jail cell that's inconsistent with the official story.
This is the story of Stephanie Hamill. Stephanie, a 20-year-old travel agent from Wakefield, West Yorkshire, had her whole life ahead of her. She was engaged to the love of her life, James Garland, and was looking forward to a really bright future. Steph and James had met at school when they were just 13 and 15, proper childhood sweethearts. By the ages of 18 and 20, they'd moved into their first place together in Wakefield, and 6 months later, James asked Steph to marry him. By summer 2003, Steph had started shopping for a wedding dress with her mum Jane. The big white wedding was all she could talk about. She was so excited to marry the love of her life. Unfortunately, the couple never got to set a date for their wedding. On November 29, 2003, the couple had enjoyed a night out together in Wakefield city centre. As the pubs and bars of Westgate were closing, and after grabbing a takeaway, the couple were going to walk home, but instead decided to try and flag down a taxi. Stephanie had been walking slightly ahead of James as the pavement was narrow, and they soon saw headlights coming towards them. Stephanie stuck out her arm, and a black Mercedes pulled up just ahead of her. As it had stopped, Stephanie assumed the car was a taxi and started to climb into the back seat. Just as James was approaching the car, the driver put his foot on the accelerator and sped right past James. Stephanie's leg was still hanging out of the back door, and James could hear her desperately screaming his name. The driver of the car was 29-year-old Ioannis Revenikiotis. He'd previously sexually assaulted a pregnant woman, and just an hour before picking up Stephanie, he'd also tried to lure 2 other girls into his taxi. When they told him to get lost, he'd carried on driving, looking for his next victim. James managed to flag down a police van, and between his distraught sobs, he managed to tell them that Steph had been taken. They drove James home to see if Steph had turned up there, but as they pulled up to the house and saw it was still in darkness, a voice came over the radio and told them that someone had been found in the road just 2 miles away. Stephanie had been found on the outskirts of Wakefield, lying in the middle of the road. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Stephanie had feared for her life as Revenikiotis drove her towards the countryside. She'd managed to get the door open, falling from the car, and being hit by an oncoming vehicle. That vehicle didn't stop and dragged Stephanie down the road before fleeing the scene. It was 2 years of living in absolute limbo for Stephanie's family before Revenikiotis was tracked down. His car was found in a scrapyard in Greece, and he was arrested. It was another 2 years before he was charged, but in 2007 the jury found him guilty of Stephanie's kidnap and manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 11 years. The driver of the car that hit Stephanie and failed to stop was Mohammed Ashik. He was given a 200-hour community punishment order and banned from driving for 18 months. At the trial of Revenikiotis, and as the verdict was read, Stephanie's family could be seen punching the air in the gallery. They said nothing could bring Stephanie back, but they took some small comfort in knowing he'd been jailed.
Did this mum save her children from a horrific attack, or was she a cold-blooded killer? It was the evening of the 13th of December 2001. Tracy Roberts was at home with her 3 children in Iowa. She would later tell police of the horrors of that evening. She said 2 men broke into her house while she was bathing her 1-year-old daughter. At this point, her husband was apparently out of town. She told police that she ran to her son Bert's room and gave him the baby before being pulled back. She said one of the intruders choked her until she became unconscious. Now, Bert apparently stayed in the bedroom guarding his 2 younger siblings and arming himself with a baseball bat. A short time later, when Tracy realised she had regained consciousness, she ran to her bedroom and apparently grabbed a weapon from a safe. She then fired her weapon at one of the men, causing him to collapse onto the bathroom floor. The other intruder apparently escaped. Now, Tracy's 11-year-old son, Bert Pittman, backed up his mum's story, but there were doubts. Investigators found Tracy's neighbour, 20-year-old Dustin Wade, dead in the home and began to analyse the scene. Interestingly, he'd been shot 9 times with 2 different guns. Tracy explained this by stating that her and her children were trying to get out of the house after she had shot the man, and they saw the person on the floor move, so she shot him again. She said in the frenzy and the panic, she'd grabbed a different weapon to do so. She then said when she found out the intruder was Dustin, she was devastated. She knew Dustin's family, and her husband Michael actually had apparently grown quite close with him. Police started looking into finding intruder number 2, who had seemingly got away, but with no luck. They then started to wonder if he even existed. Interestingly, nothing of value had been stolen from the house. The only thing that was found was an old computer, which had carefully been placed into Dustin's car, which was on the drive. A paramedic also stated that the marks found on Tracy's neck did not match with strangulation and seemed to be self-inflicted. Tracy's ex-husband John was looked into as the pair were in the middle of a custody battle. To police, she painted a picture of an abusive ex who she alleged SA'd her son Bert. He denied this and claimed that Tracy was the one who was abusive to him and that she'd even threatened him once with a gun. Then investigators turned their attention to Tracy's husband Michael. As I said, he'd had a close relationship with Dustin, but apparently had been physically abusive to Bert. He allegedly even broke his nose once during an argument. Michael denied this, but he did have a history of violence. He was arrested in December 2000 after an argument with Tracy. Tracy accused him of pushing her to the floor and making her hit her head. Michael claimed that Tracy once got him drunk and tried to suffocate him with a bag. Following all the accusations and counter-accusations, the pair divorced. The case went cold and Tracy moved to Nebraska with her children. Now, Dustin's mum remained incredibly frustrated about her son's death. To her, it didn't make any sense. Dustin considered Tracy a friend, and he also hadn't armed himself with any type of weapon going into the house. He'd also just kind of casually parked his car on the front drive. His mum's concern grew when she found out that he actually had been shot into the back of the head 4 times. This indicated that the shooting was not self-defense. The case was reopened in 2008 and there were more troubling revelations. The house hadn't been particularly dishevelled and there were inconsistencies in Tracy's story. Many who knew her described her as manipulative and aggressive. Then there was the discovery of a notebook in Dustin's car. Dustin had seemingly written a strange tale about being contacted by John, who was Tracy's ex-husband. In the notebook it said that John wanted Dustin to kill Tracy. However, there was something strange about this tale in the notebook. It gave very specific details about John that Dustin would never have known on his own. Investigators started to wonder whether Tracy had fed Dustin this information to write in the notebook on the night he was killed. They noticed that the language that was used in the notebook was almost identical to the language Tracy used to describe John. She was arrested and charged with Dustin's murder. It later came out that Tracy had asked Dustin to come to the house on his own sometimes to do paperwork for her. Police believed that maybe Tracy was just trying to use Dustin in order to frame her ex-husband and therefore win the custody battle. Tracy was eventually sentenced to life in prison. This case made me terrified to go to the cinema. This is the case of the horror in Screen 9. James Holmes was raised in California. His mum was a nurse and his dad was a scientist. From a young age, he was experiencing night terrors and allegedly actually tried to take his own life when he was just 11 years old. He was apparently obsessed with guns and weapons and had dreamed of becoming a mass murderer. Between May and July 2012, he legally bought 4 guns. Background checks were conducted and he was allowed the weapons. He also bought spike strips, which, if you don't know, pop the tyres of cars if they chase after you. On July the 19th, just hours before tragedy would unfold, James mailed his notebook to his psychiatrist. Inside the notebook, James detailed his plans to kill. The notebook was actually discovered later on undelivered. Just prior to entering a cinema in Aurora, James rang a crisis line to tell them about his plans to kill. However, the call was disconnected after just 9 seconds. At the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises, CCTV captures James walking into the cinema. He walks into Screen 9, props open the door, and then walks back out again. Shockingly, he goes to his car and gets guns out and gas canisters. He re-entered the screen at about 12:38 PM and set off 2 gas canisters. When he entered Screen 9 again, he immediately opens fire on the audience, instantly killing 10 people. 2 others later died in hospital from their injuries. An additional 70 people were injured. This was an absolutely packed out cinema. James also shot at people as they scrambled to exit the screen. His youngest victim was a 6-year-old girl. Witnesses said this all unfolded as there was actually a gunfight on the screen, and initially they all thought it was special effects and just part of the film. Police were actually on the scene very quickly after the first 911 call. James surrendered to the police and was arrested in the car park. He was apparently very calm when he was arrested and told police that he had booby-trapped his apartment. When police investigated his apartment, this was found out to be true. He was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences.